Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. Page 418. 30 April, 1 May, year of the Depend adult undergarment. Maroth did not quite sleep. They had remained on the shelf for some hours. He thought it a bit much that Steeply refused even for a brief time to sit down upon the ground. If his persona's skirt rode up above his weapon, what was the difference? Were grotesque and humiliating undergarments also involved? Maroth's wife had been in an irreversible coma for 14 months. Maroth was able to refresh himself without quite sleeping. It was not a state of fugue or neural relaxation, but a type of detachment. He had learned this in the months after losing his legs to a USA train. Part of Maroth floated off and hovered somewhere just above him, crossing its legs, nibbling at his consciousness, as does a spectator at popcorn. At some times, on the outcropping, Steeply went further than crossing his arms, almost embracing himself, chilled but unwilling to comment on the chill. Maroth noted that the gesture of self-embrace appeared convincingly feminine and unconscious. Steeply's preparation for his returning field assignment had been disciplined and effective. The feature of complete unswallowability about M. Steeply as a USA female journalist, even a massive and unfortunate-looking USA female journalist, was his feet. They were broad and yellow-nailed, hairy and trollesque, the ugliest feet Maroth had observed anywhere south of 60 degrees north, and the ugliest supposedly female feet of his experience. Both men were strangely reluctant somehow to broach the subject of plans for getting down off the shelf in the utter dark. Steeply didn't even waste time wondering how Maroth could have gotten up or down there in the first place, short of some sort of helicopter drop, which capricious winds and the proximity of the mountainside made unlikely. The dogma around unspecified services was that if les assassins du fauteuil roulant had one Achilles heel, it was that their penchant for showing off, making a spectacle of denying any kind of physical limitations, etc. Steeply had field interfaced with Remy Maroth once, on a rickety-feeling Louisiana oil platform, 50-plus clicks out of the Cayuse Bay, covered the whole time by armed Cajun sympathizers. Maroth always disguised the boggling size of his arms under a long-sleeved windbreaker. His eyelids were half closed whenever Steeply turned to look. If he, Maroth, were a cat, he would be purring. One hand stayed below the blanket at all times, Steeply noted. Steeply himself had a small and unregistered Taurus PT9 taped to his shaved inner thigh, which was the main reason he was reluctant to sit down on the outcropping stone. The weapon was unsafetied. In the faint lumen starlight, Maroth found the four-limbed American's high-heeled feet compellingly grotesque, like loaves of soft, processed USA bread, being slowly squeezed and mangled by the footwear straps. The meaty compression of the toes at the shoe's open tips, the leather faintly creaking as he bobbed up and down, hugging himself chillily in the sleeveless summer dress, his fleshy bare arms webbed redly with mottle. In the chill, one arm luridly scratched. The received wisdom among Quebecois anti-ONAN cells was that there was something latent and sadistic in the Bureau de Service Sans Spécificité assignments of fictional personae for its field operatives, casting men as women, women as longshoremen or Orthodox rabbinicals, heterosexual men as homosexual men, Caucasians as Negroes, or caricaturesque Haitians and Dominicans, healthy males as degenerative nerve disease sufferers, healthy women operatives as hydrocephalic boys or epileptic public relations executives, non-deformed US personnel made not only to pretend, but sometimes to actually suffer deformity. All for the realism of their field personae. Steeply, silent, rose and fell absently on the toes of these feet. The feet were also visibly unused to high USA women's heels, for they were mangled-looking, deprived of flowing blood, and abundantly blistered. And the smallest toenails were blackening and preparing, Maroth noted, in the future to fall off. But Maroth knew also that something within the real MU Steeply did need the humiliations of his absurd field personae. That the more grotesque or unconvincing he seemed likely to be as a disguised persona, the more nourished and actualized his deep parts felt in the course of preparation for the humiliating attempt to portray. He, Steeply, used the mortification he felt as a huge woman or pale Negro or palsied twit of a degenerative musician as fuel for the assignment's performance. Steeply welcomed the subsumption of his dignity and self in the very role that offended his dignity of self. The psychomechanics became too confusing for Maroth, who had not the capacity for abstractions of his FAR superiors Fortier and Brouillim. But he knew this was why Steeply was one of Services Sans Spécificité's finest field operatives. Once, spending the better part of a year in magenta robes, sleeping 3 hours nightly and allowing his large head to be shaved and teeth removed, shaking a tambourine in airports and selling plastic flowers on median strips to infiltrate a cult-fronted 3-amino and hydroxypyroline import ring in the USA city, Seattle. Steeply said, because this is the thing about the FAR that really gives them the fantods. If you're talking about fear and what to fear, he spoke either quietly or not, that Maroth could determine. The empty expanse they both faced off the shelf sucked all resonance, causing every sound to sound self-enclosed, and every utterance to seem flatly soft and somehow over-intimate, almost post-coital. The sound of things said beneath blankets, winter beating at the log walls. Steeply himself appeared frightened, perhaps, or confused. He continued, This disinterest by you guys, it seems, in anything but the harm itself. Just getting the entertainment out there to hurt us. The naked aggression by us. Muscles beneath the nylons of the calves bulged and receded as Steeply bobbed. The boys in behavioral science say they can't see any sort of positive political goal the FAR even wants. Anything Duplessis was having your 40A work toward. As the USA fantods are meaning fear, confusion, standing here. The FLQ and calmest shit, even the most whacked out of Alberta's ultra-rightists. M. Duplessis had once studied beneath the radical Edmonton Jesuits, Maroth reflected. then we can begin to understand as political bodies, them we can more or less get a feeling for dealing with. Their aggression is clothed in agenda. The Bureau of You perceives. Steeply's was a thinking face now, in apparent puzzlement. They at least have aims, real desires. For themselves? Steeply appeared convincingly to ruminate. It's like there's a context for the whole thing. Then, with them, we know where we stand differs from where they stand. There's a sort of playing field of context. Causing the chair to squeak, Marath again rotated 2 fingers of a hand in the air, which for Kebisers signifies impatience. Rules of play, rules of engagement. The other hand was with the Sterling UL machine pistol beneath the blanket. Even historically, the 60s bomb tossers, the spick separatists, the ragheads, very charming. These are attractive terms. Ragheads, Colombians, Brazilians, they had positive objectives. Desires for self, which you could understand. Even if the objectives were nothing more than things we could file, pinned to the board under stated objectives. The pathetic spicks, they wanted certain things. There was a context, a compass for maneuvers against them. Your guardians of national security could understand these positive desires of self-interest. Look at them and relate, as one says, at least, knowing where you stand on the field of play. Steeply, slowly nodded, as if only to himself. There wasn't just pure malice. There was never the sense that here were some people who had just all of a sudden let the air out of your tires for no reason. You allege we disperse our resources deflating automobile tires? A figure of speech, or for example, a serial killer, a sadist, someone who wants you down just for the deviant sake of wanting you down, a deviant. Far south, a blinking system of tricolored lights described a spiral over the airport tower's pulsing tip. There was a landing aircraft. Steeply lit another cigarette off the butt of his previous, and then tossed the butt, peering over the shelf's edge, to watch it spiraled fall. Marath was looking up and right. Steeply said, because politics are one thing, even way out far in the distance fringe politics are one thing. Your Fortier doesn't seem to care much about reconfiguration, territory, redemisement, cartography, tariffs, Finlandization, ONANite, Anschluss, or toxic waste displacement. Experialism. Steeply said, or so-called experialism, even separatism. None of the other cell's agendas seem to drive you people. Most of the office sees it as just sheer malice with you. No agenda or story. And for you, there's something appalling? Steeply pursed his lips, as if trying to blow something off them. But when there are delineable, strategic, political goals and objectives, when there's some set of ends we can make sense of the malice with, then it's just business. Nothing of persons. Marath was looking up. Some of the stars seemed to flutter, others to burn with more steadiness. We know which end is up when it's business. We've got a field and a compass. He regarded Marath directly in a way that was not accusing. This seems personal, he said. Marath could not think of descriptions for the way Steeply regarded him. Neither was it sad, nor inquisitive, nor quite ruminative. There were small flickers and shadows of movements around the flickers of the celebratory fire, down far away, on the floor of the desert. Marath could not determine whether Steeply was truly revealing emotions about himself. The flickers continually went out. Small shreds of young laughter drifted up to them in the vacuous silence. There were also sometimes rustles in the hillside scrub of gravel or small living nightly things. Or whether perhaps Steeply was trying to give him something, let him know something, and determine whether it went back to M. Fortier. Marath's arrangement with the Office of Unspecified Services seemed most often to consist in submitting himself to numerous tests and games of truth and betrayal. He felt often with the USOUS like a caged rodent, being regarded blandly by bland men in white coats. Marath shrugged. The USA has previously been hated, richly so, Shining Path and your Maxwell House Company. The trans-Latin cocaine cartels and the poor late M. Kemp with his exploding home. Did not both Iraq and Iran call USA the very large Satan? As you hatefully say, they have heads of rags. Steeply exhumed smoke quickly to reply. Yes, but there were still contexts and ends, revenue, religion, spheres of influence, Israel, petroleum, neo-Marxism, post-Cold War, power jockeying. There was always a third thing. Some desire. Some piece of business. Some third thing between them and us. It wasn't just us. It was something they wanted from us or wanted us out of. Steeply seemed earnestly to say it. The third thing, the goal or desire. It mediated the ill will, abstracted it somehow. For this is how one who is sane proceeds, Marath said, paying great concentration to aligning the blanket hems against his chest and wheels. Some desire of self. And efforts expending to meet that desire. Not just wanting negatives, Steeply said, shaking the lowered head. Not just wanting some other's harm for no purpose. Marath again found himself pretending to sniff with the congestion. And the USA purpose desires. This he asked quietly. Its sound was strange against stone. Steeply was pinching yet a next particle of tobacco from his lipstick. He said, This you can't generalize on with most of us, since our whole system is founded on your individual's freedom to pursue his own individual desires. His mascara had now cooled in the formations of his past running. Marath kept silent and fussed with the blanket, as Steeply sometimes regarded him. A whole minute passed this way. Finally, Steeply said, For me personally, as an American Remy, if you're really serious, I think it's probably your standard of old basic American dreams and ideals. Freedom from tyranny, from excessive want, fear, censorship of speech and thought. He was looking with seriousness, even in this wig. The old ones. Tested by time. Relative plenty, meaningful work, adequate leisure time. The ones you might call corny. His smiling revealed to Marath lipstick upon one incisor. We want choice. A sense of efficaciousness and choice. To be loved by someone, to freely love who you happen to love, to be loved irregardless of whether you can tell them classified stuff about your job. To have them just trust you and trust that you know what you're doing. To feel valued. Not to be agendalessly despised, to have good neighborly relations, cheap and abundant energy, pride in your work and family and home. The lipstick had been smeared onto the tooth when the finger had removed the grain of tobacco. He was faisait monter la pression. The little things, access to transport, good digestion, work-saving appliances, a wife who doesn't mistake your job's requirements for your own fetishes, reliable waste removal and disposal, sunsets over the Pacific, shoes that don't cut off circulation, frozen yogurt, a tall lemonade on a squeak-free porch swing. Marath's face, it showed nothing. The loyalty of a domestic pet? Steeply pointed the cigarette. There you go, friend. High-quality entertainment, high value for the dollar of leisure and spectation. Steeply laughed agreeably, exhaling a shaped sausage of smoke. In response to this, Marath smiled. There was some silence for thinking, until Marath finally said, looking up and off to think, this USA type of person and desires appears to me like almost the classic, how do you say, utilitaire. A French appliance? Comme on dit, Marath said, utilitarian, maximize pleasure, minimize displeasure, result what is good. This is the USA of you. Steeply pronounced the USA English word for Marath, then. Then a sustained pause. Steeply rose and fell upon his toes. A bonfire of young persons was burning some cade down away on the desert floor, the flames burning in a seeming ring instead of a sphere. Marath said, but yes, but precisely whose pleasure and whose pain in this personality types equation of what is good. When Steeply removed a particle of the cigarette from the lip, he would then roll it absently between his first finger and thumb. This did not appear womanly. Come again? Marath scratched inside the windbreaker. I am wondering, me, in the equations of this USA type, the best good is each individual USA person's maximum pleasure? Or is it the maximum pleasure for all the people? Steeply nodded in a way that indicated willing patience with someone whose wits were not too speedy. But there you go. But this question itself shows how our different types of national character part ways from each other, Remy. The American genius, our good fortune, is that somewhere along the line back there in American history, them realizing that each American seeking to pursue his maximum good results together in a maximizing everyone's good. We learned this as early as grade school, as kids. I am seeing. This is what lets us steer free of oppression and tyranny, even your Greekly democratic howling mob-type tyranny. The United States, a community of sacred individuals which reveres the sacredness of the individual choice, the individual's right to pursue his own vision of the best ratio of pleasure to pain, utterly sacrosanct, defended with teeth and bared claws all through our history. Bien sûr. Steeply for the first time seemed to be feeling with his hand his wig's disorder. He was attempting to straightly reposition it without removing the wig. Marath tried not to envision what his BSS had done to the natural brown male hair of Steeply to accommodate the complex wig. Steeply said, "It might be hard for you to quite understand what's so precious about this for us, from across the chasm of different values that separates our peoples." Marath flexed his hand. Perhaps because it is so general and abstracted. In practice, however, you may force me to understand. We don't force. It's exactly about not forcing. Our history's genius. You are entitled to your values of maximum pleasure so long as you don't fuck with mine. Are you seeing? Perhaps help me see by practical evidence. An instance. Suppose you are able at one moment to increase your own pleasure, but the cost of this is the displeasuring pain of another sacred individual's displeasing pain. Steeply said, well, now, this is precisely what gives us the fantods about the AFR. Why it's so important, I think, to remember how we come from different cultures and value systems. Remy. Because in our U.S. value system, anybody who derives an increase in pleasure from somebody else's pain is a deviant, a sadistic sicko, and is thereby excluded from the community of everybody's right to pursue their own pleasure-to-pain ratio. Sickos deserve compassion and the best treatment feasible, but they're not part of the big picture. Marath willed himself not to rise on his stumps again. No, but not another pain as a pleasurable end in itself. I did not mean where my pleasure is in your pain. How to say better? Imagine there arises a situation in which your deprivation or pain is merely the consequence, the price of my own pleasure. You mean you're talking a tough choices, limited resources type situation? But in the simplest of examples, the most childlike case, Marath's eyes momentarily gleamed with enthusiasm. Suppose that you and I, we both wish to enjoy a hot bowl of habitant soupe au pois. Steeply said, you mean, but yes, French, Canadian type soup, produit du Montiron, Savoie maison, prête à Sèvres. What is it with you people and this stuff? In this case, imagining both you and I are in the worst way craving for habitant soup. But there is one can only of the small and well-known single-serving size. An American invention, by the way. The 3S. Let's insert. The part of Marath's mind that hovered above and watched coldly, it could not know whether Steeply was being deliberately, paradoxically dense and annoying to arouse Marath to some revealing passion. Marath made his rotary gesture of impatience, slowly. But okay, he said neutrally. It is simple here. We both want this soup. So me, my pleasure from eating the habitant soup au pois has the price of your pain at not eating soup when you badly crave it. Marath was patting his pockets for something. And the reverse, if you are who eats this serving by the USA genius for each par sauver bonheur, then who can decide who maybe receive this soup? Steeply stood with weight on one leg. Example's a bit oversimplified. We bid on the soup, maybe. We negotiate. Maybe we divide the soup. No. For the ingenious single-serving size of serving is notoriously for only one, and we are both large and vigorous USA individuals who have spent the afternoon watching huge men in pads and helmets hurl themselves at one another in the high definition of interlace. And we are both ravenous for the cessation of a complete hot bowl serving. Off the bowl would only torment this craving I have. The fast shadow of pain across the face of Steeply showed Marath's choice of example was witty, The divorced USA man has much experience with the small size of single-serving products. Marath said, Okay, yes. Why should I, as the sacred individual, give you half of my soup? My own pleasure of atonement is what is good, for I am a loyal USA, a genius of this individual desire. The bonfire slowly was filling out. Another cross of colored lights circled the airport area of Tucson. Steeply's movements of smoothing the wig and twisting fingers through the snarls of hair became perhaps more abrupt and frustrated. Steeply said, Well, whose soup is it legally? Who actually bought the soup? Marath shrugged. Not relevant for my question. Suppose a third party now, unfortunately deceased. He appears at our flat with a can of soup au pois to eat while recorded the USA sporting, and suddenly is clutching his heart and falls to the carpeting deceased, holding the soup we are now both so wishing. Then we bid on the soup. Whoever's got the most desire for the soup and is willing to fork over the higher price buys out the other's half, then the other just jogs on down, jogs or rolls on down Safeway and buys himself some more soup. Whoever's willing to put his money where his hunger is gets the dead guy's soup. Marath shook his head without any heat. The Safeway store and bidding, these are also not relevant to my question. I hope the example of pea soup to raise, which perhaps this is a dull-witted question. Steeply was at the wig with both hands for repair. Former perspiration had mashed its form inward on one side, as well as small clots and small burrs from the falls of his descent to the outcropping. Presumably, there was no comb or brushes in his small evening wear's purse. The rear of his dress was dirty. The straps of his prosthesis's brassiere dug cruelly into the meat of his back and shoulders. Again, there was for Marath the picture of something soft being slowly throttled. Steeply was responding, No, I know what you want to raise, all right. You want to talk politics, scarcity and allocating and tough choices, all right. Politics, we can understand, all right. Politics, we can discuss. I bet I know where you want to raise the question of what prevents 310 million individual American happiness pursuers from all going around bonking each other over the head and taking each other's soups. A state of nature, my own pleasure, and to hell with all the rest. Marath had his handkerchief out. What does this wish to mean, this bonking? Because this simplistic example shows just how far apart across the chasm our people's values are, friend. Steeply was saying this because a certain basic amount of respect for the wishes of other people is required, is in my interest, in order to preserve a community where my own wishes and interests are respected. Okay? My total and overall happiness is maximized by respecting your individual sanctity and not simply kicking you in the knee and running off with the soup. Steeply watched Marath blow one nostril into the handkerchief. Marath was one of the rare types who did not examine the hanky after he blew. Steeply said, But then I can anticipate somebody on your side of the chasm retorting with something like, quote, Yes, my very good ami, but what if your rival for the pleasurable soup is some individual outside your community, for example? You'll say, Let's just make the example that it's a hapless Canadian foreign, un autre. separated from me by a chasm of history and language and value and deep respect for individual freedom. Then, in this wholly random instance, there would be no community-minded constraints on my natural impulse to bonk your head and commandeer the desired soup, since the poor Canadian is outside of the equation of pour servir le bonheur of each individual, since he is not part of the community whose environment of mutual respect I depend on for pursuing my interest of maximal pleasure to pain. Marath, during this, was smiling up and to the left north, rolling his head like a blind person. His favorite place of off-duty in the USA city Boston was in the public garden of summer, a broad and treeless declivity leading down to the Mer de Canade, the duck pond. A grassy wedge, facing south and west, so that the grass of the slope turns pale green and then gold as the sun circles over the head. The pond's water cool and muddy green, and overhung with impressionist willows, persons beneath the willows, also pigeons, and ducks with tight emerald heads gliding in circles, their eyes round stones moving as if without effort, gliding upon the water as if legless below, like films' idols in cities the moment before the nuclear blast in old films of USA death and horror. He was missing this time in USA, Boston, Massachusetts, of refilling the pond for the duck's return, the willows greening, the wine light of a northern sunset curving gently in to land without explosion. Children flew taut kites and adults lay supine on the slope, absorbing the suntan, eyes closed as if in concentration. He was giving out a small and desolate smile, as of fatigue. His wrist's watch was unilluminated. Steeply threw a butt without turning away from Marath to watch it fall. And you'll accuse me of you'll say I won't only poke him in the eye and commandeer the whole serving of soup for myself, Steeply said, but will, after eating it, I'll give him the dirty bowl and spoon and maybe even the no-deposit habitant can to have to deal with, saddle him with my greed's waste, all under some sham arrangement of, quote, interdependence that's really just a crude nationalist scheme to indulge my own U.S. individual pleasure lust, without the complications of or annoyance of considering some neighbor's own desires and interests. Marath said, "You will notice that I do not, with sarcasm, say, and we go off together once more, which you enjoy saying." Steeply's use of the body to shelter the lighting match for his smoking was not feminine either. His parody of Marath's accent sounded guttural and USA Cajun with the cigarette in the mouth. He looked up past the flame. But no. Am I off base? Marath had an almost Buddhist way of studying the blanket on his lap. For some seconds he behaved as if almost asleep, nodding very smallly with the rise and fall of his lungs. The ponderous rectangles of moving light within Tucson's nightly spread were barges of land ministering to nests of dumpsters in the deep part of night. Part of Marath always felt almost a desire to shoot persons who anticipated his responses and inserted words and said they were from Marath, not letting him speak. Marath suspected Steeply of knowing this, sensing this in Marath. All two of Marath's older brothers from childhood had engaged in this, arguing every side and silencing Remy by inserting his words. Both had kissed trains head-on before reaching marriageable age. Marath had been part of the audience for the death of the better one. Some of the barges of land's waste would be vectored into the Sonora region of Mexico, but much would be shipped north for displacement launch into the convexity. Steeply was regarding him. "No, Remy? Am I off base in terms of what you would say? The smile around Marath's mouth cost him all his training in restraint. The kans containing habitants, they say boldly, oui, recycler, c'est continent. You're not false, maybe, but I think I am asking less for nations arguing and more for the example of you and me only. We two. If we pretend we are both of your USA type, each separate, both sacred, both desiring superpower, I am asking, how is community and your respect part of my happiness in this moment with the soup if I am a USA person? Steeply worked a finger under the strap of the brassiere to relieve the throttling pressure. I don't get you. Well, we both crave badly the entire recyclable single-serving can of this habitant. Moran sniffed. In my mind, I know it is true that I must not simply make a bunking of your head and take away the soup because my over happiness of pleasure of the long term needs a community of grand bunk. But this is the long term, steeply. This is down the road of my happiness, this respecting of you. How do I calculate the distant road of long term into my action of this moment now, without dear comrade, clutching the soup and both of us with spittle on our chins as we regard the soup? My question is trying to say, if the most pleasure right now, en ce moment, is in the whole suffering of habitant, how is myself able to put aside this moment's desire to make bunk on you and take this soup? How am I able to think past this soup to the future of soup down my road? In other words, delayed gratification. Good, this is well. Delayed gratification. How is my USA type able, in my mind, to calculate my long-term over pleasure? Then decide to sacrifice this intense soup craving of this moment to the long term and overall. Steeply sent out 2 hard tusks of smoke from the nostrils of his nose. His expression was one of patience, together with polite impatience. I think it's called simply being a mature and adult American instead of a childish and immature American. A term we might use might be enlightened self-interest. Déclassant? Steeply did not smile back. Enlightened. For example, your example from before. The little kid who'll eat candy all day because it's what tastes best at each individual moment. Even if he knows inside his mind that it will hurt his stomach and hurt his little fangs. Teeth, Steeply corrected. But see that here it can't be a fascist matter of screaming at the kid or giving him electric shocks each time he overindulges in candy. You can't induce a moral sensibility the same way you'd train a rat. The kid has to learn by his own experience how to learn to balance the short and long-term pursuit of what he wants. He must be really enlightened to self. This is the crux of the educational system you find so appalling. Not to teach what to desire, to teach how to be free. To teach how to make knowledgeable choices about pleasure and delay and the kid's overall down-the-road maximal interests. Marat farted mildly into his cushion, nodding as if with thought. And I know what you'll say, Steeply said, and no, the system isn't perfect. There is greed, there is crime, there are drugs and cruelty and ruin and infidelity and divorce and suicide, murder. Tu banques Jest? Steeply again dug at his strap. He would snap open the purse and then move the brazier's right strap and then dig into the purse, which sounded femininely full and cluttered. He said, "But this is the price. This is the price of the free pursuit. Not everybody learns it in childhood. How to balance his interests." Marath tried to envision thin men with horn-rimmed spectacles and natural shoulder sports coats or white coats of the laboratory, carefully packing, with clutter, the purse of a field operative to create the female effect. Now Steepley had his pack of Flander fume cigarettes and his pinky finger in the pack's hole, evidently trying to gauge how many were left. Venus was low in the northeast rim. When Marath's wife was born as an infant without a skull, there had been at first suspicion that the cause was that her parents smoked cigarettes as a habit. The light of the stars and moon had become sullen. The moon had not yet set. It seemed as if sometimes the bonfire of youthful mafficking was there, and then, when the eyes were averted in the next moment, it was not there. Time was passing in silence. Steepley was using a nail to extract slowly one of the cigarettes. Marath, as a small child, and with legs, had always disliked persons who made comments about how much others smoked. Steepley now had learned here just how he must stand to keep the match alive. Some wind had died down, but there were scattered chill gusts that it seemed came from nowhere. Marath sniffed so deeply that it became a sigh. The struck match sounded loud. There was no echo. Marath sniffed again and said, "But of these types of your persons, these different types, the monsieur who sit down the road, the puerile type that is candy and soup in the moment only, entre nous. Here, on this shelf, you, Steepley, which do you think describes the USA of ONAN and the great convexity? This is USA you feel pain that others might wish to harm." Hands which shake out matches act always as if they are burned, this motion of snapping. Marath sniffed. "Are you understanding? I am asking between only us. How could it be that the AFR Wallace could hurt all of the US culture by making available something as momentary and free as the choice to view only this one entertainment? You know there can be no forcing to watch a thing. If we disseminate the misdat, the choice will be free, no? Free from force, no? Yes, freely chosen." Mr. Hugh Steepley of BSS was standing then with his weight on one hip and looked his most female when he smoked, with his elbow in his arm and the hand to his mouth, and the back of this hand to Marath, a type of fussy ennui that reminded Marath of women in hats and padded shoulders in black and white films, smoking. Marath said, "You believe we are underestimating to see all you are selfish, decadent, but the question has been raised. Are we South of Canada alone in this view? Aren't you afraid, you, of your government and gendarmes? If not, your BSS, why work so hard to prevent dissemination? Why make a simple entertainment, no matter how seducing its pleasures, as is that and forbidden in the first place, if you do not fear so many USAs cannot make the enlightened choices?" This now was the closest large Steepley had come, to stand over Marath to look down, looming. The rising astral body Venus lit his left side of the face, to the color of pallid cheese. Get real. The entertainment isn't candy or beer. Look at Boston just now. You can't compare this kind of insidious enslaving process to your little cases of sugar and soup. Marath smiled bleakly into the chiaroscuro flesh of this round and hairless USA face. Perhaps the facts are true. After the first washing, then there seems to be no choice but to decide to be this pleasurably entertained in the first place. This is still a choice, no? Sacred to the viewing self and free, no? Yes?